Hi everyone, I'm Lauren. I'm from Manchester. I studied fine art at Manchester Met and then carried on to do my masters in photography there as well. Today I would like you to learn about my most recent practice along with how it links with my featured artist's work and to understand how Zexta, which is my featured artist, uses different medias within her work. So my masters did overlap with the start of COVID. So about halfway through my masters, I started to produce work from home. So this allowed me to start seeing my domestic space as a multifunctional space, which then triggered ideas and thoughts within my work. I became really interested in materiality and objecthood, and initially I actually started doing drawings that were inspired by my own domestic space, objects that I found in the house, etc. I'll put some pictures on now so that you can have a look. Following on from the idea of like objecthood, I started searching through my house for inspiration. I then came across my old like family photo albums, which then did come like the focus of my work. Then focusing on these found images, I started to think about how I could work with them, so made lots of photocopies. I then started to interrupt these found images using physical ways, so using like physical manipulation, such as sewing and stitching into the surface. During this point in my work, I did start to do more research into how I could make links with movements and artists, as well as noticing that everybody else during the pandemic seemed to be finding some kind of joy in tactile activities. So that did become a focus of my research. I did also start to research into craftism, which was a third wave feminist movement. That led me on to looking into the works of the anarchist knitting mob, who purposely use these traditionally domestic crafts within their work, and kind of flip the idea on its head that this is what female artists should be doing. Obviously, at the same time, the pandemic had like fully taken over, and it had really given way to new ways of communication. There was a big rise in working digitally, and all these like new virtual environments such as like Teams, Zoom. It did make a big difference to the way that I practice, being like quite a physical practitioner. So I really wanted to explore the new kind of loss of physicality. And I did this through trying to translate my work into digital versions of themselves. So I did this through my work by creating new digital work, by combining the work that I'd already produced, so these stitched into pieces, as well as making some new completely digital pieces. So by the end of my masters, I had kind of realised that my practice in my second module was a bit chaotic. I did have lots of these interruptions, that I call them, but they do all focus back down to my family photo album. They're all found images that mostly involved me either using digital like painting software or rephotographing the images as then digital images. I did do lots of research into memory processes and nostalgia, as they have always been important themes throughout my practice at university. So things like kind of the processes of how flicking through a photo album can create thematic links within our memory were quite interesting to me. And I think that the fact that they're all found images that I do recognise highlights that point, that even though they're all different materials or interruptions, whether that's physical or digital, they do all kind of make sense and link up, to me anyway. I did also feel that this was kind of a natural progression for me. I've always thought of my fine art practice as image-based, photography-based. So working with images as kind of indexical traces, but also as objects themselves, was an important idea to me. So moving on to my chosen artist, I'll be discussing the work of Melissa Sexter, who is an American artist, well known for her embroidered photographs. She sews directly onto the photograph surface by hand, using a mix of found imagery and photographs that she's taken herself. She combines the practical, kind of traditional process of embroidery with the modern and mass reproducible process of photography. Sexter explores the photographs' materiality and views them as a 3D object. She also examines issues through her work, such as memory, technology, and identity. Through the manipulation of the photograph surface, Sexter makes these photographs unique and no longer attached to the mass reproducible objects that they were prior. Combining this older art form with the new, more modern method of photography creates embodiments of fragmentation and also focused concentration. So Sexter's work really does re-singularise these potentially mass-produced photographs by creating unique objects in which her embroidery has been used as an extension of the surface of the photograph. I chose Sexter as my artist to share with you all today because I feel like her work can be applied to a lot of different practices. I know there's a few more photographers in our group and also some textiles artists, so that's a nice crossover between the two. I feel like thematically as well, her work can have influence to practices which focus on maybe like feminism, like materiality as well, and nostalgia and memory. I feel like the context of Sexter's work in terms of her working still like currently can link to how there's a massive increase in people using their mobile phones to take photos, so there is that loss of materiality to photographs these days, as a lot of them don't get printed off. I would use Zexta's work in the classroom to maybe introduce how students could use photographs not only to document work but to then rework into. For example, students may take photos of their work and then directly manipulate those photographs. For example, they could stitch into a surface themselves, or use other materials, tapes, ribbons, buttons, sequins, to embellish that surface, but to also kind of disrupt that image as well. This idea could be as simple as finding images in newspapers and then almost collaging them with found materials, or it could be quite a structured lesson in which students could learn how to stitch and make patterns with stitch, and then apply that to the surface of a photograph. I think it's important that I do have examples of female artists' work, as this sometimes does lack in the classroom. Doing this in the classroom might be quite tricky, so I would probably approach it in a way in which I would constantly have different options available for students. So if they felt comfortable wanting to try stitching, that's fine. They could follow along with me doing it. If they didn't feel confident doing that, or weren't physically able to, they could also experiment with simply sticking objects to that surface. I would ensure that pupils have understood my instructions by asking them to repeat it back to me. I would also keep simple instructions on the board for people to follow along at their own pace. So from my video, I hope that you've enjoyed learning about my practice, as well as how Melissa Zexta combines different medias within her work, and how my work links with Zexta's. Thank you very much for listening.